so happy we alive.
Welcome to www.moresongs.com. Today we're in Washington, D.C. with R. Keith Stroup, the founder and Chief Executive Officer of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And just wanted to ask Keith one or two questions, one of which is this. Is there any room for hope whatsoever, Keith? That seems like 25 years ago we were right on the verge of reaching some common sense on this whole issue. And
well, I think you're right. I mean, in some ways it would be easy to get discouraged because it has been a long struggle, and we came very close in the late 70s to winning this fight. We didn't in the end. The other side came back. The war on drugs came full bore, and for about 20 years, they've been kicking our ass. I mean, we haven't won very many battles until about 96, when the tide started coming back our direction. So I wouldn't blame anyone if they're discouraged or jaded, or if they begin to doubt whether we can ever change things. But in fact, I will tell you that I am absolutely convinced that the momentum is now switched back in our direction again. The most obvious proof of that was in Oregon in November of 1998, when 67% of the voters in Oregon said, no, we do not want to arrest marijuana smokers. That wasn't just for medical use, that was for recreational use. And I don't think Oregon's the only state that would vote that way if the voters had a chance to vote on that issue. Our problem is that elected officials continue to act as if we're in the mid-50s in this reefer madness. Now, part of that is because they came of age during a time when all they heard was zero tolerance and mandatory penalties and longer prison sentences, and marijuana arrests kept skyrocketing. So for a lot of politicians, they still believe that if they show any support for decriminalizing marijuana or legalizing marijuana, they're going to be called soft on drugs and defeated at the next election.
exactly.
That is not the case, but we have to demonstrate that. We have got to demonstrate to our elected officials that there is a significant constituency out there. Middle-class people who vote, who live good lives, who work hard, who raise kids, contribute to their communities, the kind of Americans that we all sort of were brought up to think we're supposed to be, but they happen to smoke marijuana. And even those who don't, over half of them say it's unfair and that we should not arrest marijuana smokers. So I think the challenge for the reform constituency and for NORML in particular is to bridge that gap between public opinion and public policy. And I think that we are beginning to do that. But we've got a few years to go. I think the next 2 or 3 years we should be able to finally win the medical use issue. We've been winning it state by state. At some point the federal government's going to have to cave in. They're going to have to change federal law, and that'll be taken care of. And then the major debate will shift to, well, should we at least decriminalize the user? And if we're going to decriminalize the user, wouldn't it make more sense if we had a legally regulated and controlled market? Obviously it would. Get rid of the black market. So I am absolutely convinced that in the time frame of 5 to 10 years, we will actually finally legalize marijuana in this country. Now, I'm an eternal optimist, Patrick. I'll admit to that.
I'm going to come back to take you up on your great undertaking.
I have to admit to you that in the 1970s, when things were going well and we were winning and the country was behind us,
I thought it was all going to be taken care of back in Jimmy Carter's
That's right,
era.
exactly, under Jimmy Carter. I actually was quoted in many TV interviews and stuff as suggesting that by 78 or 79 we should have legalized marijuana, and we believed that. So I could understand if no one wants to believe me now, because I've been wrong before. But attitudes on drug policy, they shift like a pendulum, and for 20 years it was running against us. Well, it finally has started back our direction, and we're gaining momentum every day. So I really do expect great things over the next 2 or 3 years.
And Keith, we certainly appreciate everything that you have done, are doing, and we want you to lead us on to the promised land.
Thank you very much, Patrick. You're very kind.
Thank you.
It's my privilege this morning to introduce to you the man who just introduced me, the man who founded the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. A board of directors has a lot of jobs, but the single most important function by far that we have is to find and recruit and support the best national director that we can find. We have done that, I'm pleased to tell you. In Keith Stroup, we have the man who was born to play the role of the National Executive Director of Normal, who has done without question more than any other individual human being to advance the cause of positive reform of the marijuana laws. Mr. Keith Stroup.
Thank you, Dan, very much, and thanks to you folks. I have enormous fear of public speaking, and now that you've raised the ante, we'll struggle through this nonetheless. As most of you know, for 30 years, Normal has provided a voice to those Americans who oppose marijuana prohibition. We do our best to represent the interests of the millions of otherwise law-abiding citizens who simply smoke marijuana responsibly. Arresting and jailing law-abiding citizens for marijuana smoking serves no legitimate purpose. What it does is it wastes enormous amounts of valuable and scarce law enforcement resources that should be focused on serious and violent crime. The estimate is that it's between $7.5 and $10 billion a year just chasing and arresting marijuana smokers. It also invites government into areas of our private lives that are totally inappropriate. And most importantly, it destroys the lives and careers of hundreds of thousands of genuinely good citizens each year. So let me use my few minutes this morning to try to share with you my analysis of where we are politically with this issue. We've been at it for 30 years almost now. And there have been times where we thought we were close to victory, and there have been times where we were getting our ass kicked up and down the court, to be honest. And we are finally emerging from those dark days, and it's a very promising time. There is an incredible disconnect currently between the American public and our elected officials on the marijuana issue. More than half of the public opposes sending marijuana smokers to jail, yet state and federal officials, almost all of them, there are a few exceptions, I'm pleased to say, act as if the subject of marijuana decriminalization or marijuana legalization is in fact still the third rail of American politics. Touch it and your career is dead. That's why, incidentally, there is this sense that any reasonable person and all elected officials agree with that assessment, that they all support prohibition. And that's why that when Governor Jerry Johnson, as Dan mentioned earlier, did his outstanding call for legalizing marijuana, that you heard our opponents squeal loudly. They benefit greatly and have for the past 2 decades on this myth of consensus. This idea that all reasonable people support marijuana prohibition. And all of a sudden they were confronted with a twice-elected popular Republican governor who said the emperor has no clothes, the drug war is a failure, and it's time to legalize marijuana. Governor Johnson's out-front position has been one of the most important developments, I agree, in the last year, no doubt about it. Along with the victory, I think, on the medical use initiative in Maine. And it is suggestive of bigger things to come. He's not the only state and federal elected official who is considering breaking with the war on drugs. And I suspect over the next year you're going to hear from other high elected officials who say it's time we're honest with the American people, and it's time we look for alternatives to marijuana prohibition. But there are other concrete ways I'd like to point out a few things that we can point to that demonstrate that the public is actually moving in our direction on this issue. Cotton out. As Dan mentioned, in all 6 states in which the medical use marijuana has been on the ballot, it has passed and passed overwhelmingly, and we can add to that the District of Columbia, where we are now, although Congress interceded, I'm sorry to say, so it's not taking effect. And we hope in November, and expect in this November, we will be able to add Colorado and Nevada to that list as well. We will be hearing from some of the folks most directly involved in those initiative efforts later on in the conference, and we certainly deserve our thanks and appreciation. Perhaps equally as important, or in some ways more important, in Oregon in November of 1998, after a Republican legislature had voted to recriminalize